All right, hello everyone. Today we are going to be talking about corrective feedback and proficiency level. So let's get into it. Okay, so just a little background on corrective feedback. Most research done on it focuses on what type of corrective feedback is most used by teachers, and then which of those types are the most likely to then lead to uptake and uptake with repair. So you probably remember from the lecture and the readings that recasts are used the most, but they're least likely to lead to repair. Prompts, on the other hand, are most likely to lead to uptake with repair, and specifically metalinguistic feedback and clarification requests. What the research hasn't focused too much on is the individualism of students and how that impacts what corrective feedback is beneficial, specifically the proficiency level of the students. So that's what I am going to focus on today, is the proficiency level and how that really affects what type of corrective feedback is most beneficial. And my learner that I focused on was Rodrigo, which is who would be considered a high beginner language learner. So that's really what my focus is on, how it affects high beginner language learners. Okay, so I'm just going to review the corrective feedback types quickly for your memory, I guess. So there's explicit correction, which is where you explicitly say something is wrong and then give the correct answer. Recast would be when you basically recast what they said in the correct form without telling them that you're making a correction. So for example, a student might say, I go to the store yesterday, and the teacher might say, oh, you went to the store yesterday. Then there's a clarification request where the teacher asks specifically what they mean. And then there's metalinguistic feedback, which can be in the form of a comment, like such as, can you find an error, or even just no. Could be a question, like, is it regular? Or it could be in the form of information, like, oh, this verb is regular. Then there's also elicitation, which can be in the form of pausing, like it's and trailing off, allowing the student to finish. Or how do we say this in English? Or just asking the student to reword what they were saying. Again, not giving them the correct answer. And then finally, there's repetition, which would be repeating the student's error, like you go to the store yesterday, and that adjusted intonation kind of highlights that there's an error in it. So apart from the first two, the correct form is not giving in the remainder of the corrective feedback types. Then there's multiple feedback, which is when a teacher will give more than one type of feedback in a single turn. Okay, so then there is also uptake, which is the student's utterance that immediately follows the teacher's feedback and is in somehow a reaction to what the teacher was trying to highlight in the learner's language. So there's uptake with repair, which is when they would correct their utterance, or there's uptake which still needs repair. So uptake with repair can be in the form of repetition, so like in a recast or explicit correction, then they might just repeat what the teacher said. There's incorporation, where they, they repeat the correct form, but they add it to a larger utterance. Then there's self-repair and peer repair. Then with uptake needs repair, that could be in the form of acknowledgement. So the student might just say yes after the teacher gives them some kind of corrective feedback, or they could make the same error, they could make a different error, they could change the topic. There might be hesitation, like if they are confused, they're not sure what to say next, and then partial repair. Okay, so a little background on Rodrigo. Would be considered a high beginner English language learner. He's from Mexico. His first language is Spanish. He's highly educated and literate in his native language. He wants to pursue a master's degree, which is why he's studying English, so he would be a motivated learner. And although in the data analysis, his error types weren't analyzed or measured against corrective feedback given. We can just note that most of his errors were phonological or related to syntax. Also, in the language analysis, I only analyzed the tasks where corrective feedback was given. So that was the interview task, the question task, and the narrative task. Yeah. Okay, so first we're going to look at the corrective feedback that was given. So when we're looking at student turns, one-worded or really short turns that were not likely to produce an error were not counted. So overall, Rodrigo had a total of 40 turns that were counted, 24 of which had an error. Out of the 24 turns with at least one error, some had multiple, but we just counted at least one error. Out of those, 12 received corrective feedback. Out of the 12 that received corrective feedback, 2 led to uptake with repair. So 10 times corrective feedback was given, there was no uptake with repair. And so that meant out of 24 errors, 2 were eventually corrected and led to repair. So it's a little similar to past studies. Rodrigo, about 50% of his errors led to corrective feedback. In other studies, it was 43% or 19%. Lister and Ranta was a little higher with 62%. And then finally, only 17% of the errors in Lister and Ranta's study led to repair, which is a bit higher than Rodrigo, where only 8% led to repair. And let's see, yeah. So let's continue from here. Now we're going to look at corrective feedback type. So again, Rodrigo's data analysis kind of matches the research. The research overall shows that recasts are the most used. And that would be true for Rodrigo as well. 83% or 10 out of 12 were recasts. And then he only received 2 other types of corrective feedback, 1 clarification request and then 1 repetition. Okay. So now we're going to look at the corrective feedback which led to uptake. So, like I mentioned before, recasts were the least likely to lead to uptake, with Lister and Ranta found only 31%, and then most likely was elicitation, with 100% leading to uptake, with about equal of that actually leading to repair, but then following with clarification and repetition. So this is where the data differs a little from Rodrigo. Although Rodrigo had only 2 instances of uptake resulting in repair, they were both actually following a recast correction. And then both repair types were then repetition, so he repeated the correct form. And then when we look at uptake type with still needs repair, just for us to acknowledge, his uptake type was mostly acknowledgement. So yeah, basically, when he had repair, uptake, which led to repair, it was only with repetition. But again, the majority of his, it was only with recast, excuse me, but the majority of the recast still needed repair. Okay, so we're just going to look at a couple of language samples that might be worth noting. So in the narrative task 4.1, Rodrigo makes an error using the incorrect form of arrest, which is then followed by a recast of arrested. He does display uptake with repair by repeating the correct form. And then he actually repeats the correct form again in the written task, which you can see here. So this actually proves that there was uptake with repair. That did actually occur. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Okay, so another instance of language worth noting is also seen in the interview task. Rodrigo makes a morphological error with the word right. The interviewer then recasts with the correct form writing. Rodrigo then demonstrates uptake needing repair with acknowledgement, and the interviewer continues with topic continuation. Then later on, Rodrigo then repeats the initial mistake. So this sample differs a little bit more from the other ones because most of the time when there is uptake with still needing repair and there's topic continuation, we never really see it repeated again. In this instance, he does repeat the same mistake again, so showing that really there was no repair, even though he acknowledged the mistake. Okay, and then the final segment, language segment that we're going to look at is, again, from the interview task, where Rodrigo, he makes multiple errors, and the interviewer initially repeats Rodrigo's utterance. However, in this case, her repeating it is not an example of corrective feedback because she wasn't correcting an error, she was just repeating him. Rodrigo then replies like yes to show agreement. And then she recasts an error from the 34th line, more easy. Rodrigo then makes the same error with more, but then he makes a different error with his mispronunciation of easy when he says more ease. So the interlocutor or interviewer, then she makes a partial correction. She corrects the phonological error by saying more easy. So there's still like a partial error in her utterance. Rodrigo follows this up with uptake needing repair by acknowledging it. And then the interviewer recasts again with it's easier now with the correct form of easy. It's easier. So there is a total of 7 turns being taken here between the two of them before Rodrigo initiated topic continuation and really still leaving the error still needing repair. Okay, so now we're going to look at what the data showed us with corrective feedback and learner proficiency. I'm not going to read through all of this. You can pause the video and read it, but basically what we see here is that beginner or low-level students are more likely to receive recasts or explicit correction, and that higher level learners are more likely to receive prompts. So given Rodrigo's proficiency level, the corrective feedback type he received actually mirrors these studies mentioned. So he received, again, majority recast, and out of the corrective feedback types actually received, he only had 1 clarification request and 1 repetition. No other instances of metalinguistic feedback, explicit correction, or elicitation. Okay. So then when we look at the proficiency level, and then what corrective feedback results in repair. Again, I'm not going to read through everything, but basically what all these studies have found is that more advanced learners are more likely to have uptake and uptake with repair from recasts and explicit correction than lower level learners. However, prompts are still the most beneficial for all levels of learners. But basically, even though beginner learners are least likely to benefit from recasts and explicit correction, that's the type of feedback that they receive the most. As their level goes up, they receive less recasts, less explicit correction, even though it's a little more beneficial for more advanced learners. Okay, then there's also some other factors to consider. There's learner preference, and that's like all on an individual basis. The native learner's first language or native language can also influence what corrective feedback is most beneficial to them, as well as their cultural background. So really at the end of the day, you have to know your students and know what's going to work best for them. So overall, in terms of Rodrigo, the majority of the the literature review, the majority of it found that recasts to be were the most used type of corrective feedback, both in general, but also in terms of lower proficiency level learners. The literature also showed that recasts were the least effective with low proficiency students, as well as everybody. Rodrigo's language analysis somewhat matched this literature. His errors received corrective feedback in the form of recasts most often, but the only instances where corrective feedback actually led to uptake was with repair, was after a recast. But again, this is only 2 instances of uptake with repair, so it's not a ton of data. The other 8 recasts did not lead to uptake with repair, and neither did the other types of corrective feedback received. So because, again, there are only 12 instances where corrective feedback was given, I don't think that there's really enough information to really make a clear conclusion here. Overall, a larger language sample is needed to determine the most effective form of corrective feedback for Rodrigo, as well as other learners of his level. Okay, so the references, and yeah, any questions or comments, you can post them below, I suppose. Thanks.